So we follow our little text there again. So you don't need the last one. You can throw the previous one away. The new one always preserves what was done the last time. And we come to our third discourse, believe it or not. So there are still 3 left. That's all there's left. Okay, and we always want to start with our reading, because we made a difference between Thomas More's Utopia and then the Christian or the Jewish or the Islamic eschatology. Eschatology means the last days. It means the kingdom of God. It means judgment day. It means that there will be no death anymore, that there will be no tears anymore. So, but there is a difference. Eschatology has to be done by the sovereignty of God. The utopia, human beings can do. The utopia shows, as we said, what ought to be, what a society ought to be like. And in contrast to what it really is. It is messed up. So the humanist then, Thomas More, shows us what it would be or ought to be like if it was good or if it was healthy and not sick as it really is. So therefore the utopia is written so that people would do something about it. And we could say that the utopia is a preparation of the eschatology. So human beings, God decides when the Messiah will come, but people can do something on their own. And the utopia shows what they could do in the meantime because of the parousia delay. That means the delay of the Messiah's coming. So what do we do in the meantime? We can just sit there. We can just go along as things go along and so on. But what Thomas More, the Christian and the humanist, says is there's something to be done by us in between. And so we just want to read a short text first that we don't forget this. It is called in theology the eschatological reservation. The eschatological reservation. It is not, the utopia does not show us what ultimately will be, but only what we can do in the meantime. Okay, the Revelation, and it says here, I think, 21, 1-4. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. That's what we cannot do. We are living on the old earth and under the old heaven, under the sameness of the identity of this old world. The first heaven and the first earth had disappeared now. So that is the vision of the prophet on Patmos, John. Not the John who wrote the Gospels. We thought it was the same guy, but he's not. So, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, that is Jerusalem, and the new Jerusalem, not the old Jerusalem, where they just planned the attack against Gaza, but a new one, a transfigured Jerusalem, coming down from God, out of heaven. So it is not the result of bourgeois evolution or the result of a Marxist type of a dialectics. It does not go horizontally, but it goes vertically. It strikes vertically, it comes suddenly, like a thief in the night, and all these images which we have. Therefore, when September 11th happened, suddenly secular newspaper like the New York Times had an apocalyptic type of a language. Modern secular people fell suddenly into this type of a eschatological language because it came suddenly, it was unexpected. The development which led to it, we were not aware of it, etc. So, therefore, it's a good image for this. Coming down from God, out of heaven, as beautiful as a bride all dressed for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice call from the throne. You see this city? Where here God lives among men. He will make his home among them, which means also that he is not here now, that he is missed now, that we are missing him. So the greatest lie which the non-believers think believers are producing is that they say the redemption has already happened. What the believers really say, Roman Catholics and Protestants and so on, is we are redeemed and we are not redeemed. Now this double statement, the non-believers think is a dirty trick. In reality, this is an unredeemed society. And every news which you have on television shows you that it is unredeemed. That means whatever is prophesied here is the future. God out of heaven, and so on. Then I heard a loud voice, the city, and so on. Here God lives among men. That will be in the future. It is not now. God is, the word is godless, and God is wordless at this moment, as American deism describes it. The God in the Declaration of Independence is a deistic God. He has left the world to itself, to its own laws and mechanisms, and has gone. So therefore, the world is atheistic, and God is acosmic, as this is called. So here, God, and He will be their God. His name is God with them. He will wipe away all tears. Of course, nobody wipes away any tears. You know, in Buffalo, just the airplane crashed, 50 people dead, and so on. And there is death, and there is weeping, and there is mourning, and so on. All this is not any longer in the new heaven and the new earth. Thomas More's world, which is utopia, there is still dying, there is still weeping, there is still mourning. We cannot create a world in which there would be no death, in which there would be no weeping, and so on. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, and no more mourning or sadness. The word of the past has gone. So this is the eschatological reservation. That is the hope of the believers. And this is for what they stand. This is the challenge which they offer. This eschatological reservation is a provocation for all our sciences and so on. What the sciences can, they also predict today catastrophes. Somehow stars striking the earth or volcanoes breaking out. They just have changed their theory about the Saurius having disappeared and so on. They thought it was an impact of a star down in the south of here, but the Saurius died out already 300,000 years before that. So now they think they were annihilated by a volcano outbreak, super volcano, and not by anything which came out of the sky. So, and when 70 or 80% of the vegetation went under, they think now that this planet or whatever came down, that life was not really touched by it, but that it happened 300,000 years before. So that means we have to be skeptical, not only toward creation, but also toward evolution sometimes. Okay, so the word of the past has gone. That is our eschatological reservation, and now we can go again to what is our real theme here, namely Thomas More's Utopia. Do we have still any question of what we said the last time? In our second discourse, we differentiated between eschatology and utopia. I just did this once more. The utopia we can realize, the eschatology God must realize. The utopia, sometimes I complain about this parousia delay, and European theologians just wrote to me recently, well, that is, Protestant theologians, that is in God's sovereignty, and man cannot interfere with this. God will strike whenever God wants to strike, and there is no human interference into this. So it's still a problem. We also concentrated on the central category in St. Thomas More's Utopia, namely the private ownership of the means of production. So that was a central category which we want to hold on to. All the other categories are connected with it. So there was an issue of enclosure at the time of Thomas More. We remember, and that was also in the letter there, which was very well done. So we are in a transition period. Thomas More lived in a transition period from the feudal system, the feudal lords with their ownership, and then it moved over into the capitalistic system. That was the beginning, and we are at the end now. So what you see every night is the complaining or the resistance against the unavoidable, namely the disappearance of the capitalistic system. So we are in another transition period from the capitalistic system to a system, let's call it X, because we are not entirely clear what the name of it is. Now, the right-wing radio people call it socialism. Maybe that is the name for it, but At the moment, we should maybe leave that open where we are going. But what we know is that capitalism will disappear. That means all the measures which the government takes, this 700 billion which tonight will come through, and then there will be another trillion which will be planned a few months later, and so on. All that may give works to workers. It may get us the fast railroads which they have in Europe, and so on. It may rebuild the bridges, and so on. But the capitalistic system will go. And that is what, of course, the Republicans want to hold on to. They say we stick to our principles. They really have only one principle, and that's the principle of the selfishness of the rich, and you can call it what else, narcissism or whatever. And they emphasize and emphasis, and like sitting on the Titanic while it is sinking, they sing the song of the Titanic or whatever with the orchestra and go on with it. So it is finished now. If there should be a restabilization, it will be short time, short stabilization of the stock market, short stabilization of the auto industry, and so on. But the sooner, what our thesis was, the sooner we see that the system which we were used to is going under, the less painful it will be. The more we spend 1 trillion after the other in order to rescue what cannot be rescued, the more painful the whole thing will be. So even the president himself, I don't think just says it, but he also means it, that what he is doing is a rescue operation. But the nation can be rescued, the state can be rescued, the civil society can be rescued to some extent, but not the capitalistic system. And everything what we learned and so on was all based on this system. It did not break down after the First World War with 10 million people dead. It did not break down after the Second World War with 70 million people dead, which it had caused, but it is breaking down now. So this is the similarity between Thomas More and us. And our question is a very pragmatic one, very practical one. Can Thomas More tell us something? That means, can he give us some categories which help us to sort things out? Because we are, over-informed. We get a lot of information all the time. Tonight, I think Clinton wanted to introduce the Fairness Act again. I don't know if you know what the Fairness Act is. The Reagan voted it down the last time. We have these right-wing operators, these right-wing radio stations, this Bimbo there, whatever his name is. So these people get masses of capitalistic money. And so again and again people have come up and now again want to have the Fairness Act. That means these radio stations and the Fox News and so on continually bring right-wing propaganda without any balance. So the Fairness Act would mean that they have to, every right-wing, every fascist, or very often fascist statement has to be balanced by another one, whatever that is, the X one, the other one, the alternative to it, which they don't. They go on for hours and hours. I mean, even the Nazi propaganda of Dr. Goebbels, there was a wrong sentence, a lie, and then came a true sentence again, and then a lie. Fox goes on for half an hour with just lies, with any interruption whatsoever. I mean, that this is swallowed by people is amazing, because what Dr. Goebbels did was, when you had the suspicion, boy, this sentence doesn't sound kosher, there must be something wrong with it, then he brought it as a true sentence. He said, well, this is true, maybe the first one was true too. But with Fox, you don't even have this consolation. It just goes on and on and on. And so, therefore, the Fairness Act, maybe this time they get it through, would then also money-wise, I think, what they get, and that they get all these millions of dollars for their propaganda thing, that this will be regulated. So it's a regulating of the overall, of course, what that means, the transition period is now that regulation, that policing will increase. And what we can only hope is that there will be a small private sector, but which will also be policed, but which nevertheless will still be in private ownership. Everything else will be federalized. Okay, so, but what we have in the utopia, there were this core concept of private ownership. Somehow, Thomas More, and we have to prove that to ourselves if that's still true, he thinks that everything depends on this, the private ownership of the means of production. And so let me just give you an example how he connects that. For instance, a great problem in his time was enclosure. Enclosure meant that the feudal lords who owned land bought up or with violence threw out all the little farmers and transformed all the acre, the land, the arable land where people had planted things and so on, in what is it called, grassland, for cows and for sheep. And therefore comes this saying for that the sheep is such a harmless little animal, but the sheep have begun to eat the people. The sheep have begun to eat the people, they said at this time. Shakespeare has it too. So that means they threw the farmers out and they made it all into grassland, and then you need much less people because you need now just one who stands there with thousands of sheep and so on. You don't need all these people who work the land now. And those suddenly, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 of people were without work, were without houses, they were driven off their farms and so on. And then of course the result was thievery. That means these people who had nothing to eat, and they just went out and stole. And so the king then put the death penalty on on stealing. So before that there was the death penalty for adultery, for instance. And as the bourgeoisie comes through, the death penalty shifts over to poverty. And Thomas More argues against that. It says this is too harsh. When somebody steals something and so on, then you should pay it back maybe, or you put them into prison or put them to work or whatever. But for poverty, you take a life, that seems not to be a healthy legal principle. But you see how it is connected now. It is the owners of these private estates now, which make the decision that it will be grassland for the cows and the sheep, and who then take away the little farmers and their poverty and make their estates bigger and bigger and bigger and so on. And then it goes from the need system into the administration of justice, so that the laws are made in such a way that whoever steals now is hanged. Sometimes they were hanging 20 people on one gallows. So Thomas More then protests against this and says, now why are they stealing? They are stealing because they have been driven from their land, because they have no work. And yesterday our Secret Service fellow gave a report where he said that with the breakdown of capitalism we have to expect that in all parts of the world the crime rate will go up. And they expect it here too. See, but the important thing is now not to say these are bad people, these are thieves and so on, but rather to make what we call today a sociological analysis. What makes these people into criminals? The system makes them into criminals. Who is the system? The owners of these big estates. That means the private ownership of the means of production is the core of the problem. So therefore we must not allow these people to change all the land into grassland and so on. And then more people will have work. And then when they have work, they will not steal. That is how one solves the problem. See, and so there are lots of people on the right here who think that this is a character problem there, that this guy becomes a criminal and so on. But what if you don't have a job now? They suddenly give you, General Motors says, you know, you go now. And you said, I worked there for 20 years, you know. Well, I got my degree there, you know. I did all the right things, and now you throw me out, you know. And then he reacts maybe and kills somebody in his frustration or whatever, you know. But the society does not really see what role it plays, that this went so wrong with this guy. It is the victim who is identified as the victim is guilty. The victim is guilty. You know, that is part of this whole mindset. Okay, Marta, did you want to say something?
Yeah, getting back a little about punishment with the death sentence.
Yeah.
What would be the basis for the death sentence before the enclosures?
Well, I mean,
murder or something like that.
Yeah, I mean you know, if you go from the Torah and so on, then it's life for life, it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so on. So that would mean life for life. In that sense, they had death penalty before. So if you look at the whole history, you know, all the Western states had the death penalty up to the First World War. And then Hitler used it in such a massive and cruel way that people were ashamed later on to have it. So all Western states, up from 1945 on, canceled the death penalty, including ourselves. So not even in the case of murder, the death penalty was applied, but life imprisonment and so on. But then came our destabilization. That means in the 60s, when the students rebelled, when they wanted to break out of the capitalistic cage and wanted to have new love and new religion and new marriage and all this, and then were repressed and were shot at Kent State and Mexico City, and where 300 of them were butchered and so on. It went from, the killing went from Japan through here to Rome and so on. So then they were put back into the iron cage, and that's where they have been ever since. And you can see that with how they sit in the classroom and so on. So this, and we, when the destabilization set in, and we practiced what is called the Nixonian counter-revolution, the neoliberal Nixonian counter-revolution, then the country was destabilized. And in this destabilization, the Supreme Court gave permission to the states to reintroduce the death penalty again. And about 25 or 26 states or so did it. We in Michigan didn't do it, but there are people who are working on it, you know, to get it here too. But other states who have had it have doubts in the meantime, because there were too many people who have been executed and they found out later on that they were not guilty and so on. And so if they are in prison and you find that out, you can get them out of prison. But when you have hanged them, then nothing can be done anymore. So some of the states have now, I don't know, 5 or 6 or so, have suspended it, the death penalty, for some time. This is what Thomas More, by the way, also says. He says, let's make an experiment, you know. Let's give people jobs, and then let's see if they are still stealing. In the meantime, we suspend the death penalty, and if the experiment goes wrong, then you can go on with your death penalty if you want to, you know. But at least we should try, and so that's what states have done in the meantime. And so if they see if they can really be sure, how can you really be sure that this guy really did this? And what if you suddenly have a new technique, you know, DNA or whatever, and you find out that this guy was supposed to be guilty, isn't guilty anymore. So then you cannot change it. You cannot undo what you have done. Okay, so in that sense, and that is the question, you know, if we can apply this now, if that is still true for us. And so what we have is the problem in terms of the propaganda, the education or the training which we had for centuries practically in this country, which meant that we lifted up the businessman. The businessman was that what the bishop had been before, or the nobleman was before. And people admired them when they built their big castles along the Hudson River. Sometimes they brought really the old castle from England with the stones and shipped them all over and built it at the Hudson River. So they took the place of the nobility. And every week there were people who said they started with 10 cents and now they have 10 million and so on. Then people admired them, you know. Only a few were sitting there and said he stole it all, because he could never recover the 10 million with his working hours which he had available. If he did not produce with his work, then somebody else had to produce it with his work and didn't get it, and he didn't work and got it, and so on. So, but we have learned that these gangsters now are to be admired. That means they wandered psychoanalytically into the superego. They're sitting inside too, you know, and say, there's businessmen. And you hear that every night, you know. The businessmen know best. But they have just messed it up. You know, they are the cause of the whole thing. But they know it best. And the federal government should not come in there, but should leave it to them. So now, after ruining the whole thing, we give them all these billions now. And who polices the whole thing? You know, what do they take 20 billion out in Wall Street and give it as a bonus for the great accomplishments which they had in the last 8 years or whatever. So, but it is something, you know, that we have to be serious about the educational side. what has been done, what that means how people have been conditioned day after day after day throughout all this. When I go to the swimming pool, you know, there is this Fox News again. So I say, turn it off, please turn it off, or get some alternative from Japan or somewhere from the North Pole or whatever, but something sane for once. Then they turn it off, but when I go, they turn it on again. So this, but there is no resistance against that. It just, they go on, they are allowed to, and this thing to say, you know, we want to have a Fairness Act or so, that is the first time, I didn't even know, you know, that Reagan was the last one who repressed it. Also a right-winger, so who should have been impeached and lost it all and could not be impeached anymore. So, but that would be a good measure now. We have to think of step-by-step measure that they would be forced to balance. I mean, Fox always says, you know, balanced, that he has balanced news or whatever, but there is nothing balanced about this guy, so these people. So therefore, when they say something, they have to give another voice right away. The right wing, and then the center or the left or whatever has to come in right away. And that would be very helpful, and I hope, you know, somebody would move it. Okay, Walter, anything else?
Then this here balance, this here, change the way news is done is really an old issue. Then it isn't just since Bush.
No.
That goes back quite a ways.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, we had, when I was here the second time, you know, after I was here at the Prison of War, then I was here, you know, as a student, and it was the McCarthy period. They had the same, you know, powerful right-wing propaganda continually. So, I mean, you know, that is in the framework of law and our traditions that, you know, that everybody has entrance into the public sphere. And so to put that on people, I mean, you could say that the left wing, we don't have any, but if we had some, that they would also be obligated, you know, to show the opposite opinion, that, and to get the right wing stuff too. So that's fair, you know. I mean, that's why it's called the Fairness Act, probably. So okay, so utopia, the private ownership of means of production, is one of its categories. Other things, like for instance, enclosure movement, the stealing, the lawmaking, the administration, the punishment, and so on, that somehow these things are connected. What we get when we Google or so is a dismembered type of a knowledge. The things are not hanging together. And people have even learned a deep hate against theory, even in our universities. That means they don't want people to have a theory. That means they don't want to remember. It has been dismembered, and what the theory would do is that we would remember. That means put the members back into the whole of the body. So that means everybody walks around with a schizophrenic type of a consciousness. And so that, you know, and when we Google or so, and the computer only produces more of that half education, which has these dismembered fragments, and then you cannot really act on them. They are very confusing. The fragments all contradict each other. And then people say, well, and then even when the professor says, you know, I don't know anything, then everybody, you know, that's a great teacher, you know, he's honest, he says he doesn't know anything, but what the hell is he paid for? I mean, he's supposed to know something. So therefore, if we could re-honor again the whole issue of having a theory. I mean, liberalism was a theory once, but already by 1827 it was bankrupt. How one can go on, you know, for 200 years with a bankrupt type of a theory, which reconnects things in the wrong way, so that when it stinks in the head, finally it's also on Wall Street, and so on. That is an amazing thing, you know. I mean, how this conservatism, which holds on to a theory dogmatically, in spite of the fact that it has no grounding in reality any longer. So, nevertheless, that is what we said the last time. It helped us to decode these somehow concepts, help us to not only to discover, decode what's in the book there, but also the fundamental problems of the transition period between feudalism and capitalism. That is how he understood it, how he was able to understand his time, and in which Thomas lived, as well as the transition period from modernity to post-modernity, because we cannot act when we don't grasp it, if we don't comprehend it, what is happening to us. That is the first presupposition that one can do something, the government can do something, and that the citizens can do something. So let's say, you know, from modernity to post-modernity. Modernity means, of course, capitalism. It means the domination of the bourgeoisie. And post-modernity is the negation of this. We know that it will negate what we have now. Hopefully, what is coming will not negate things abstractly, because in the modern period, great things have been done as well, including the capitalist. When Marx wrote the Kapital, he did not call the book The Capitalists. He called it the Kapital, the capital. That means the capitalistic system and the capitalists are two different things. So that means the capitalist himself is a prisoner of his own system. So when we blame a president here on campus, like Bailey or whatever, what she did wrong or whatever, she can probably say, I had to give so many $1 million back to the governor. If we go to the governor and say, why did you take the money back? And the governor would say, because I didn't have it, I didn't get the revenue from Detroit, from the ruling class. If we would go to the ruling class, the business guy of General Motors and so on, then they would say it's the market or whatever. That means they would say we had no choice. We had to let 10,000 people go or whatever. If you see the movie, there are more the what is it called, Roger and Me or so. You see the whole dilemma. Who is really responsible? Not the stockholders, not the CEO. This Roger is fired shortly after the movie, so it's not the CEOs. So is it? It's the owners. It's the owners of the means of production whom the workers never see. What they see is Rogers. But Rogers is an employee of the ruling class with a lot of money, but he is not the ruling class. He is not the owner. And so, and little details, for instance, that you know, the stockholder is an owner. The gangster there, Bush, it's a nation of owners or whatever. I mean, he's not the owner of the corporation. You only have to go back to the beginning where Thomas More was. When somebody, for instance, had a ship and wanted to go to the Americas and get gold or whatever. But he couldn't pay the crew. So he would go to Amsterdam or Lisbon or whatever to his friends and would say, each of you give me $100 and then I can pay my crew there, and they go over and they bring the gold, I'll give you $150 back. That's what stocks means. But what they own, the stockholders, are the stocks, but never did they own the ship. The ship remained under the captain. If the captain was the owner, he could also be hired. But the ownership of the ship and the stockholder ownership are two different things. So, but we were always told, you know, as if my mother-in-law, you know, had maybe $900 in stocks or whatever, and she thought she was the owner of the movie house there, which she had the stocks and so. So, you know, these economic illusions have a lot to do with it, why it is so difficult for us now to go from one system in which we were used to another one. And it is psychologically very uncertain, because it's like a little turtle or whatever who gets rid of the old house, and it's a very vulnerable time now to build another house around it, and during that time it can easily be attacked and so on. So, or when you take the old city-states, when they had to broaden their walls, you know, there was a very vulnerable time. Hopefully the enemy would not attack during that time when they had to take one wall down and build another one and so on. So snails, you know, the little snail houses in a certain rhythm, or the skin of a snake. That's where we are. We leave the old capitalistic skin behind, but there is no new one yet. And in the meantime, we are naked, which is a very unhappy situation before we have grown another skin again. So that is what we mean with the transition period now. Okay, so we said that we wanted to start out with a time diagnosis and prognosis all the time, and that's what we want to do. First of all, just a little side. I told you, I think before, that our government, that means the whole cabinet of Bush, in the last 8 years, that they are all under suspicion of war crimes. And therefore, every state which belongs to the UN has not only the choice, but has the legal obligation to catch them wherever they appear outside of the United States. So it is not, and I stress this, it's not that they are free to do that or not. They have, as member states, the obligation to catch the war crime suspicious people and to put them on trial. In the ideal case, to send them to Den Haag, which is the War Crime Tribunal, which is the continuation of the Nuremberg trial, which we have put together, which was a tremendous accomplishment, the Nuremberg trial and the Tokyo trial. This was completely new land in terms of the development of international law, and we made a great contribution to this. But now have not signed on to Den Haag, because we always are suspicious that we would do war crimes and we don't want to be put before that trial. So Milosevic we put there, but we don't want to go there. So nevertheless, the Bush now, and gangster to the last moment, he makes a trial balloon now. He will go next week, I think, to Canada. And he will only go 2 miles into Canada and will simply test it. That means it is the closest country, and it has a right-wing government like we had in the last 8 years. So what he really gambles is they won't fulfill their obligations. Let's see if they will dare to fulfill their obligations. That means now, even after he has lost the immunity, diplomatic immunity, already when he went, I think half a year ago, I think he went to Ottawa, and the lawyers already started to work on it, but he still had diplomatic immunity. But now he doesn't. And he goes without it now, just a few miles across the border. So if there anything should wobble there in Ottawa, he can just jump back again across the border and so on. But I mean, the mind, you know, the gangster mind which is behind this is not entirely human, you know. So, but we will see what happens, you know, if anything stirs in Ottawa or not, or if his criminal calculations, you know, they will not honor their own obligation, you know, to hell with the UN. I mean, he was unilateral all the time, and he is now unilateral. They won't do it, you know. They will not. A good friend like me, you know, who did these great things, they will not catch me, and then so on. So Rumsfeld was caught in France already, you know, and the Germans bailed him out in the last moment and sent him back again. So this, I mean, that they, you know, that one calculates that 180 nation states will not fulfill their international obligation, you know, is in itself already shows what kind of a worldview that is and who governed this country in the last 8 years. Okay, but that was just on the side thing. What I wanted to, of course, you know, how is that connected with what we said before? What he trusts really is that the same ruling class which rules this country is also ruling the Canada. And that he, after all, was a functionary of that ruling class. And that therefore this ruling class in Canada will as little do anything against him as the ruling class here does. The ruling class, you know, if somebody doesn't function, like the guy in the Canal Zone, who is now a prisoner in Miami, or Saddam Hussein, who has been hanged and so on. So the ruling class punishes horribly those who disobey them. But those who obey them, and that is what Bush did, to the letter he obeyed them, they can trust that they are well protected. So he hopes, you know, that the corporate ruling class, which is the class which owns the means of production, that they will protect the guy who did that wonderful job for them. I'm always reminded when I was a prisoner of war, we had a German from Lithuania, a huge guy like Max Schmeling and so on. He was made the head of the camp. So the camp was under self-administration in a certain sense. So he answered to the camp commander outside, but inside of the camp he was ruling and so on. So somehow the ruling class, you know, takes somebody from the low middle class or whatever and put him up there, and he plays the governing or whatever while they have him under control. And if he doesn't work, and Hitler was one of them, and Mussolini was another one, then they become furious, you know, and annihilate the guy who disobeyed, but at the same time reward the guy who served them well. And so he tests this now. That means the ruling class in Canada, I mean, if you look at Montreal, you know, or Quebec, that's all General Motors, you know. It's the same ruling class. And therefore, what he really calculates is the government is right-wing in Ottawa, and in reality it's not the government which governs, but it is the Canadian ruling class, and therefore they will not do anything to me. The UN may say whatever they want to, they will not fulfill their obligations and so on, you know. And this is, to see this in that way, in that cynical way, you know. Only a very criminal mind, primitive mind can see things like this and go along with it. So, but, you know, let's see what the test will be. I mean, let's see if some lawyers suddenly arrive from Ottawa, or, you know, if they say something, or if they just let it pass. And if they just let it pass and let the criminal cross the border without catching him, you know, then we have a very sad sign that the UN does not stick together against its own criminals, as they promised in Nuremberg and promised in Tokyo and promised when they went against Yugoslavia and are still going on against Yugoslavia, and Serbia has to deliver its war criminals before it can become part of the European Union and so on. So we will see how things develop, or if we, you know, if Kucinich's 25 impeachment points, if they will be enacted or so. Sometimes there is some crumbling, we have to do something about this, but we'll see how much guts we have to live up to the law, or how much guts the UN has to live up to the law. Or if an individual gangster, a group of gangsters, you know, can just walk about freely, you know, in the bright daylight, and nothing happens to them. Okay, that was one, yes.
I don't think that'll happen. I think there will be nations that will stand up.
Well, let's see.
Imprison him.
Yeah.
There'll be something that'll weaken.
Or try, you know. I mean, we're, you know, we want to be realistic. I mean, if there is at least some stirring going up, you know, I say we should do that, or that is our obligation, you know, we cannot do it and somebody wants to prevent it, but at least some struggle, you know. One extreme would be that he goes over there and absolutely nothing happens. Or that he goes over there and a group of lawyers in Ottawa said, you know, we have this obligation now, you know, in order to send the police. You know, but if no police comes and catches him, then, you know, it's a breakdown of UN solidarity. Because we have laws inside of the country where people do not have the political will to enforce that law. There is a long way to get a law and you know, to promulgate it and so on. But then there is still the issue, you know, can it be enforced? Do we want to reinforce it, or do we want to enforce it, or not? Or do we have the will and the means and whatever? So we'll have to see what will happen. Okay, that was one point. Now the other point is an internal church affair. I think we touched it already a little bit. When we talk about Thomas More, we said already that he belonged to a group of humanists. The leader of these humanists was Erasmus of Rotterdam. A very beautiful man. He was the illegitimate son of a priest. He joined an order. He asked to be freed from the vows. He became a secular priest, and as a secular priest he was the assistant or whatever of the Bishop of Rotterdam for some time, and then developed an unbelievable literary activity. He translated the Bible, and he wrote all kinds of critical stuff in order to reform the church. People expected at the time of Thomas More that Erasmus would really be the reformer, but it didn't happen that way. Erasmus was a little guy, and he was afraid of his health all the time, and he couldn't breathe very well, and he was not martyr material, while Luther was like a bull in the jungle and so on. So he simply broke through, didn't think of his own little body, and risked the martyrdom and to be caught and to be killed and so on. So I think I told you that Charles V, you know, on his deathbed in Valladolid said, I should have killed him, I should have killed him. he ruined my church and he ruined my empire. That was Luther. We should have killed him. So Luther was really in danger, and everybody who would reform the church, you know, would also do something to the empire. And therefore, it was a very dangerous thing what Luther did, and Erasmus was simply not strong enough to do that thing. And he was louder. Luther was louder and shouting all the time, and Erasmus was a quiet little man, and he enjoyed his tranquility and to study and to explore the truth and not to shout and be a propaganda minister of some kind. So, nevertheless, this movement, by 1531, 32, 33, 35, and so on, Lutherans, Protestant humanists, and Catholic humanists came together. I mentioned to you that I wrote my dissertation on Helding, and he was one of them. And they wanted to reform the church. They didn't want to tear apart the church. By the way, let me say right away that also Luther did not really want to tear the church apart. Luther wanted to reform the church as well. But this evangelical reformation turned then into a schism and into a heresy and blew up the whole Western church up to the extreme where we have now 1,200 Christian cults, sects, denominations and churches and so on, and everybody says something else. So this is not a normal situation. That's not how Jesus envisioned it, who said, be one like I and the Father are one, and now they are 1,200. And I know that people in the neighborhood, you know, don't like this. I said this once in K College, and people were horribly upset, you know, because it seems to torpedo, you know, the whole Protestant evangelical paradigm, as this is called. I don't want to say this, but the first paradigm of Christianity, the Judeo-Christian paradigm, is normative. So the New Testament is normative for all other paradigms. And nobody stressed that more than Calvin and Luther and so on. The scriptura, sola scriptura, the scripture alone, that means the first paradigm. And so if we take that seriously, the scripture alone, then we must say that the scripture wanted us to be one. Not necessarily under the Patriarch of the West or the Patriarchs of the East or whatever, but to be one. I leave that open, how this oneness should express itself. Nevertheless, so if Erasmus had made his reform and it could had come through, and Nicolaus of Cusa was another great cardinal in the same tradition, or there was a Cardinal Contarini. You know that lay people can become cardinals, they don't have to be priests. Contarini was a layman and was a cardinal, and he had the same justification theory which Luther had. And so when Contarini talked with the Protestants, they were all in agreement, both sides, Catholics and Protestants, that the justification comes through the sacrifice of Christ alone. The indulgences have something to do with the punishment which remains. So even after you have been forgiven your sin, stealing, adultery, or whatever, there is still the church punishment, and that is taken care of by the indulgences. But never did the church teach that by our own works we could in any way redeem ourselves. That was Luther's misunderstanding, and these Erasmians were clear that the church had taught. So I think that the practices of the church, you know, were suspicious, and that the farmers misunderstood the whole thing, the difference between punishment and redemption. And let me just say for one word to fill us in where that all comes from, because we have to see how this developed. So during the first 300 years, when Christianity was in opposition to the Roman state, and when the Christians and the Jews were sentenced because of high treason and atheism. They were atheists because they didn't sacrifice to the gods. The gods then did not protect the Roman Empire, and therefore they were also charged with high treason. So by Roman law, all the martyrs of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century were all sentenced rightfully according to administration of justice. Now, when one of these people who were sentenced to die in the circus or whatever next Sunday, if he would offer his sitting in prison to somebody at home, in the home church, who had confessed to 3 mortal sins, which would either be idolatry, adultery, or murder. He would confess that before the whole community. There was not this little room which we have here, the private confession. It was a public confession, and you said, I committed adultery. Then this was forgiven then, during the Mass. But since there was a punishment, the punishment was that he had to leave the church and stay outside for 1 year or for 300 days or whatever. If that potential martyr would say, I offer my suffering that this guy can come 300 days earlier back into the church community, that is the beginning of the indulgences. Later on, when there was no circus anymore, the monks took over the role of the martyr. And so then people could make a pilgrimage to a monastery and would get 300 days release and so on. And not in the church now, but also after death in purgatory, as this developed slowly, the purgatory. It wasn't there from the beginning. There's no, in the New Testament there is no purgatory and so on. But then people could be freed, you know, had to sit in purgatory 300 days shorter or 1 year shorter and so on, and then they could go to heaven. So this is how it evolved, and then there were horrible abuses connected with it in the 16th century, which Thomas More and Luther and everybody, of course, acted against. They have in the meantime reformed the abuses, but the indulgences you can get in St. Augustine down there. And you know, 3 Our Fathers, or making a little gift or whatever, and but it nowhere says that this frees you from your sins. It just says it frees you from the punishment which you deserve for your sins. So this was not seen by it. So nevertheless, if Contarini and these people in the 30s had come through really, then there would have been a reform of the church, but there would not have been a split of the church. And it would have changed the face of there would be no religious wars, no 30 years wars. And without the 30-year war, there would not have been the protest of the bourgeoisie, there would not have been the separation of church and state, there would not have been the privatization of religion. All these are consequences of the Reformation. So, the Reformation, how it went. So it is not, we have to differentiate between a Reformation, which Erasmus and Thomas More and so on wanted to do, and then the Protestant Reformation, which really took place, and which produced something in an unintended, we say today, unintended consequences, because Luther did not, and Calvin did not intend to split the church. They intended to reform the church, a rightful intention, which then had these unintended consequences of splitting the whole thing, the whole Western Christianity up, because the Eastern Christianity remained intact under the 6 patriarchs, or the 7. And in the West, the patriarch of the West is the one who suffered this horrible disintegration of the Western Church. So, now the question is, what we say now is that what Erasmus and Thomas More and so on, what these people intended did not come about. In little things you can see that they wanted to free the clergy from celibacy. And it came through. For 2 years the celibacy was suspended, and then came the Jesuit counter-reformation of Ignatius of Loyola and their retreats, the 4-week retreats, and they brought all the priests, or tried to bring the priests back again, and the celibacy was reinforced. If a priest had a woman in the house, and most of them had, was executed, the wife and the priest, and so on. So there were brutal attacks by the Inquisition, and so the Jesuit counter-revolution then conquered back the southern part of Germany, for instance. It was able to keep Catholicism in Italy and France and in Spain, but it lost in Northern Europe. That means the northern part of Germany, Denmark, Scandinavia, and so on, they all became Protestant. And in detail, that meant, for instance, the sacrament of marriage, which we celebrate, became a sacrament in the year 1000, but in the year 500, in all the northern Scandinavian states, it was already no sacrament any longer. So it was only for 500 years a sacrament. And you see that all these, you can go into little details of what the consequence of all that was. So the church which you have today, Benedict and so on, or before, is not the church which the Erasmians and which Thomas More had in mind. So therefore, Erasmus was never canonized. Thomas More was canonized in 1924 and 1925 or whatever, and not for these 400 years. So this humanistic thing, which was reconciling and mediating Protestant and Catholics, was lost as soon as the Trent Council was called in. My bishop there, Helding, he went to Trent, and he was in the first year of Trent, he was the only German bishop there at all. The bishops didn't even come. And that Helding shouted and screamed against the Pope as long as he was in Trent, What an unbelievable failure this Pope was, and so on, who had called it in, And that he didn't mean it, and that it was all a fraud. And then he left again, Trent, and went home to Mainz, where he came from, and so on. So later on they got the council again together, but it was a very shrunk-up council. All the orthodoxy was missing. The councils in antiquity had the whole Roman Empire. Now, Trent Council and Vatican I and Vatican II, you have to think that this is not the whole church. Not only the Protestants were missing, but the Orthodox was missing, that was before Roman Catholicism. So therefore, it is not really the unity which was intended, in the New Testament. Okay, so that means now that in the 20s, somehow there was a rebirth of these Erasmians. And there was the attempt, to develop this humanism in the church after all, which they had planned. And so the celibacy was only one thing. The other one was the chalice. You can go on Sunday now and you get the bread and the wine. That was denied to the lay people for 400 years. The Erasmians had it already. With the Second Vatican Council, some Erasmians came through. So Karl Rahner, for instance, was a humanist at the same time. So Metz, Küng, and so on. These are the humanists who suddenly came with the crisis of the church and so on. In the 20s came up and they gained control of the Second Vatican Council and then broke through in the Second Vatican Council for a moment. But as soon as the council was over, and during the council already, there was a conservative and reactionary counter-movement against this. And that brings me to the events which took place in January. Because the Pope before had excommunicated 3 bishops in Switzerland who did not accept the Vatican Council. The Reformed canons, they refused to put them into action. And as a consequence, the last Pope excommunicated them. But it was not John Paul II who excommunicated them, because behind the throne there was the Great Inquisitor. Ratzinger was the Great Inquisitor. It is now called the Faith Congregation. It has another name, but it's the Holy Inquisition. And so the Holy Inquisition, Ratzinger, threw these 3 out and excommunicated them. And in January, as Pope Benedict, he took them back again. But one thing, tiny thing you may say, of reform which the Second Vatican Council brought in was that it cancelled statements in the liturgy which said that the Jews were responsible for the execution of Jesus. And when the excommunication had been lifted, one of the bishops said that the 6 million Jews had not been killed. That means he was a Holocaust denier, as that is called. In Germany there is a law against this, and in Austria you are punished with this with prison when you say the Holocaust did not take place. And here, by the way, we had trials too against people, you know, who denied this. There are people who are specialists for execution, and they traveled to Germany and they went to Auschwitz and so on, and they looked for Cyclone B, and they could not find Cyclone B. They also did not find the execution chambers. When you go to Auschwitz, you find a little execution chamber where you could maybe execute a few people, but the claim is that they executed up to 10,000 people a day or so. And there is no installation of any kind where one could have done this. So there were all kinds of these things have been went on there. And in Iran, they also denied the Holocaust, and they had a word, state pays the priests and so on. So they have taken themselves off the list now. Holocaust wrote to the Pope that he was very sorry that he had made so much trouble for the Pope, but he did not rescind his statement. As a matter of fact, the followers of these three bishops have said that they stand for these texts which the council had taken out, and that they want to have these texts to be in, and that they will go into martyrdom before they give up that. So what will the Pope do now? He has to put them under excommunication again, or has to persuade them that they change their mind, or whatever. So that's what the rabbis demand now. The rabbis went to Rome, and the Pope had to be much stronger against his own friends on the right. He's a right-winger, the Pope, and throughout, I mean, politically and otherwise, and so on. If he says today, you know, he was in Hitler Youth, he never went, that's simply not true. Everybody was in the Hitler Youth, and everybody went. They may not have liked it, but the police would have come and would have dragged you to the service. He said he was in the army a short time, but he deserted. There was no way to desert, neither. You were shot when you deserted. So, and then even if he would have gotten away with it, how did he know that the state had lost all right? Does it mean that because President Bush has killed 1 million Iraqians, that therefore the American government is so criminal that all the oath which the soldiers have taken to the Supreme Commander, that this is not valid any longer? I mean, did he have an infallibility thing by which he could know when a state becomes so criminal that you have the right as a soldier to desert? The German government was recognized internationally, which is the basis of its sovereignty, was recognized up to the very end. Hitler set up Goebbels as his chancellor, and Goebbels committed suicide, and then Dönitz became the president of the German Empire, and he had to appear in Reims before Eisenhower and so on, and this was all a legitimate government. So therefore, how should an individual soldier say to an internationally recognized government that this is not valid anymore, and therefore he can desert? So all this is right-wing babble, and so on. So, and people knew that before, but he was put in the Germans thought that there should be a Polish pope, and so they put a Polish pope in. But that pope was not the intellect which was necessary, and so they put behind his throne Ratzinger, whom they promoted very fast in